we seem to have reached the crossroads pretty quickly this season concerning Leeds manager Daniel Farke, with a growing number of Leeds fans believing that if the club sticks with Daniel Farke as manager this season, that they will be relegated from the Premier League. Are these Leeds fans right? In which case, should the higher-ups there, the 49ers, make a change down the line, or even now, for the best, for the long term, for Leeds United's viability as a Premier League club? It's a really fascinating debate. It's very, very complex, requires quite a lot of thought and quite a lot of evidence. I'll try and give you mine right here, right now. Before I do that, please do hit the subscribe button on this channel if you're enjoying the video for more similar content, and give us a thumbs up as well, and hit like. Helps us reach as many people as possible. This has been on my mind since talking to Conor McGilligan and Matt SB on the Three at the Back podcast yesterday. We will link that show up there at the end of the video, but I've had time to ruminate on it, and I'm going to give you maybe a bit more detail than I did on that particular show. Why are we here, and do the Leeds fans have a right to feel the way they feel? Well, look, let's deal with that. Any football fan base, or any football fan, I don't want to say all the Leeds fans are thinking the same thing about Farke, but have a right to feel how they feel at any given time. Leeds are 16th in the Premier League, so if you stop the clocks and they finished there, everyone would be happy. Daniel Farke is quick, as I probably would in his position too. He's quick to point out they're at 1 point per game, which you would think would keep you in the Premier League. It might not be the silver bullet. You never know. But over the last few seasons, certainly if you'd been anywhere near 38, maybe even 35 points, you would have survived in the Premier League. But what do the trends say? What does the information say about where we are now as opposed to where we are going? Wolves really are struggling. So it could be that you're down to 2 relegation positions, but Sunderland are doing incredibly well, promoted team from the EFL last season. Say it how it is, they're not going to get relegated. They've already got 19 points. They'd have to really fizzle out in the... Well, let's not even say fizzle out, collapse in the worst possible way to be involved in the conversation. So on the one hand, you can take out 1 relegation place, but on the other hand, you can take out 1 promoted team. And as much as I wear my EFL hat, the EFL teams are kind of up against each other, and it's almost good for the likes of Leeds for their own survival if the other EFL teams are struggling. Burnley are 1 place and 1 point below Leeds, but maybe a bit of a different feeling with Scott Parker there, being he's only been at Burnley for the 1 season. Farke has obviously been in a little bit longer, and I suppose there are comparisons you can draw in terms of both those managers, making comparisons between Premier League management jobs they've done and Championship management jobs they've done. So I understand why we are where we are. So let's dig in to Farke. We'll deal with the past, and then we'll deal with the now, and then we'll deal with the future. It's like a Charles Dickens Christmas story here. And we've had this debate with Farke for a long time, because you can really silo off his EFL managerial jobs against his Premier League, because he's been incredible in the EFL. Came in at Norwich 14th in the first season there, and then the big pivot in 2018-19. They jumped up 13 places, won the title, scored 94 points, and played brilliant football with Buendia and Pookie and the youngsters, Aarons and Lewis and Godfrey, those lads at the back. It was a brilliant managerial performance. The next time he was in the Championship, this time he had the parachute payments, and he still had the majority of those players, key of that Buendia, and they won it again, 97 points this time. Next time we see Farke back in the EFL, it is with Leeds United, and this might be the defining season in the whole tale, because he finishes 3rd, and misses out on promotion. Scores 90 points again, misses out on promotion in the playoff final, which is a very significant moment, which we will get to later in this story in the conclusions. Then, last season, with probably a worse squad than he finished third with, he finishes first and scores 100 points and takes Leeds back to the Premier League. So I don't think many people would argue in this story that Daniel Farke is a good football manager, and that has been proven in the Championship. Okay? That's not the beginning and end of the tale, because at Premier League level, where Leeds are right now, it's been a big struggle. Norwich City finished bottom in the 1920 season with 21 points, which is a horrifically bad total. However, it was very much acknowledged that the club were paying for the sins of the past and banking the money they made in the Premier League to reset the decks, repay the debts, and essentially they didn't sign anybody. So the team that got promoted, quite extraordinary actually, went up from 14th to 1st, was left to play in the Premier League. And if you remember, the season was paused for COVID. And as we're going to talk about what Sunderland are doing right later and what Leeds have done right this season, if you're going to play in the Premier League, you really need your home form to be great, and you really need some supporters to be in your home stadium. So there are mitigating factors there. Farke obviously back in the Premier League with Norwich 2 seasons later, then 21-22. This is really not good either. 5 points from 11 games. So again, abject relegation form, bottom of the table form. And he was sacked. There's less of a however, but there is a however. They did spend some money this time, Norwich, but they did not spend it particularly well. Matthias Norman, Christoph Jollis, Josh Sargent came in at that point, and he is now developed into a good player in English football, but maybe not at Premier League level, and maybe he wasn't then. So, in conclusion, in the Championship, Daniel Farke has been incredible. In the Premier League, he has been horrible. But there's some mitigation and a small sample size. And it's hard to tell whether that conclusion is right or wrong. That he's good in a 46-game league outside of the Premier League and he's bad in the Premier League. So how do we use what we know about Farke in terms of making a call? And this is what the 49ers group have got to kind of figure out about this season. So what's a little bit different this season is that Leeds have recruited a type of player that Farke hasn't traditionally had, in terms of they've gone for a bit more physicality with Beal and Stack and Calvert-Lewin, you know, big players through the middle of the team, with the idea that in the Premier League now, the best leverage you've got as a promoted team, knowing that all of the other 17 that have now been in there for 3 consecutive seasons, although Sunderland look like they are going to put an end to that this season, fingers crossed for the goodness of English football, but all of the other 17, you can't compete with them technically, because they've all been up there for ages. They've all banked 100 million quid TV money for multiple years. You can't get players immediately that are technically as good. And we all know the PSR stupidly kind of punishes the Championship teams, really, because you'd think they would need to spend more than the teams that are up there. They're not actually permitted to, because it's obviously tracked against their income in the Premier League, in the Championship. And Leeds are obviously down there for 2 seasons, so significantly lower than the rest of the teams in there. But the idea was there's going to be a bit of an adaptation for Farke and Leeds to a slightly more physical style, because let's be fair, his teams in the Championship, Buendia and Pukki at Norwich and Somerville and Nonto and Ruter and James, it's been diminutive players scoring lots of goals, making lots of chances, but not necessarily beating up on teams and trying to leverage that advantage as you seem to have to a little bit more in the Premier League. So there's been a bit of a pivot. And I guess if you ask the question, what would success for Leeds look like? I don't think anyone really believes that Daniel Farke now, and I know you can argue, well, Bielsa did, but it's a different time now. Farke's not Bielsa, and we haven't had don't underestimate what this 3 seasons of the same 17 clubs being in the Premier League has done in terms of exaggerating the already massive chasm financially there. I don't think anyone believes that Farke could sign 2 or 3 players, play exactly the same football, and have success and survive in the Premier League. I don't think, as a premise, that's going to work. So I guess success would look like an adaptation to a more physical style. The other thing I don't believe is that Daniel Farke would immediately play a high line, kick the ball into the channel, surrender possession. That's just not him as a manager and what we've seen him being successful doing. And, everyone has their right to their philosophy on how they want to play and how they want to work and how they want to run their life and what they want to do with their job. And that's just not what he would do. So it would, in my opinion, if Leeds were going to be successful this season, be a hybrid between a physical style in the Premier League. Maybe if you look at David Moyes at Everton or even at Brentford, they're quite good with the physicality and pop long throw-ins and whatnot. Obviously, Moyes teed that up for West Ham for a long time to be in the Premier League surviving. And we'll talk about Sunderland in a minute, who are doing all of those things very well. Nottingham Forest did. So there is a blueprint there. I know there are teams like Bournemouth and, say, Palace and Fulham that have played prettier football, but just don't think financially and recruitment-wise Leeds have got that type of player that would be able to do that and succeed. What would failure look like for Leeds? I think it's blindingly obvious. It would be Farke failing to adapt. So, i.e. using the same pattern of play and strategy that has worked for him in the Championship, where he's had Buendia and Pukki and Nonto and Ruter and James and Gray and whoever, really strong players. But now he's got inferior players. So essentially you're playing the Premier League at their own game. They will likely beat you. And if they don't do it in 60 minutes, they'll do it with their incredible squads and 5 subs they're allowed now, based on the 100 million quid TV money they've all banked over years and years that Leeds haven't been able to. So failure would look like a failure to adapt, really. And I wonder if that's where we're going, because there had been moments, I think he's kind of flipped to a 4-3-3 shape, and there were moments earlier in the season where Leeds got clean sheets at home, say against Newcastle, and really close against Bournemouth. I know you can do fine margins about every promoted team, and that 1-0 win against Everton, where you're looking at it saying, well, okay, this might be a little bit different, and is it necessarily fair to compare the Norwich seasons against this season? I don't think it's fair to compare those, but it doesn't mean that people who are using that as their evidence are going to be wrong. Ultimately, they could turn out to be right, and Farke could come up short for exactly the reasons that Norwich failed, plus the extra mitigating factors there. Look, how is this going to work out? I will say, do not underestimate how hard it is for promoted teams to do well in the Premier League, for the reasons we've already said: PSR, the 17, and just this idea that the level of the teams in the middle of the Premier League is not necessarily worrying about getting thrashed by Liverpool, Arsenal, Man City, Chelsea, etc. But the fact that Bournemouth, not necessarily Fulham this season, but Brighton, Palace, have all, turned into teams that can easily dispatch of you with, massive benches of international players now. So those points that you might have been able to pick up against the, quote, mid-table, they're less so now. However, we can't just sit here and make a video that says it's impossible to survive in the Premier League. And unfortunately for Leeds and for Burnley to a lesser extent, I guess, look what Sunderland are doing. And Sunderland had a bit more PSR headroom because they hadn't been spending masses on wages, and they hadn't been in the Premier League, which is strange because they didn't have the parachute payments, but that actually gave them more headroom. They've sold really well, Sunderland, and look at how the Stadium of Light is. Raucous, happy without the ball, happy to kick it in the channel. They've got strikers scoring goals. They're happy to stick a long throw in. And Sunderland are not tippy-tappy in processing possession in their way to points this season. They are fighting their way to points, and it is brilliant to see. And I'm sure the Leeds fans would love to see their club doing that right now. So, where we are at round 11, with West Ham and Forest below Leeds and Leeds at a point per game, is everything going to stay the same and Leeds going to survive with Farke in the dugout doing what he's doing now? I don't think so. I think they would be relegated. I think you'd get a trend up from West Ham and Forest. Leeds maybe regress off that points total. Maybe it's not as abject as Leicester, Ipswich and Southampton were last year, but that would be enough to stick them in the bottom three, maybe with a Burnley and maybe with a Wolves. You're then banking on Fulham to, I don't know, sack their manager and have a massive internal fallout, and Wolves to maintain their terrible form and Rob Edwards to not get a tune out of them. So I'm a massive Daniel Farke fan. I cover the Championship each and every year, and he has produced some of the best football I've seen in that league and in that Norwich 2018-19 season. One of the most extraordinary teams and promotions I've seen as well since I've been covering it. So I come from the point of being a big fan, maybe have a little bit of bias towards him. Maybe I'm even too far in the pro-Farke camp. However, my confidence is lower than it's probably been, and I'm closer, I think, to the Leeds fans saying, oh, if this stays the same and he doesn't adapt quickly, i.e. now stylistically or in January with a couple of extra signings, then I do think that they're doomed to fail, in which case there is an argument that you make the change now or soon, i.e. before the January transfer window. And I want to talk again just about the season in the Championship where he did fail, because I do think that's quite revealing for a couple of reasons, and it might be the thing that stitches Farke up at Leeds even a couple of years down the line. A, because had they got promoted, and let's be fair, it's the team I support that killed Leeds, Ipswich having maybe the only promotion more extraordinary than Farke's at Norwich was Ipswich's to finish above Leeds and put them in the playoffs, which they lost in 23-24. If Leeds had got promoted then, Farke would have gone up with Nonto and Gray and Somerville and Ruter, and I think they would have had a better chance of surviving then than they do now. And this is all sliding doors and ifs and buts and maybes and all of that good stuff. Also, you don't then have that second year of the Championship where you have to sell more players and that financial shrinkage and that squeeze. I know you still have the year 2 parachute payment, but you're still carrying high wages from the Premier League and you're trying to just drip out as much as you can to get yourself back before the egg timer turns over completely and you're in the same boat as everyone else. Not that Leeds would ever really be in the same boat with their commercials and their ability to make money, from their big fan base and their gate receipts and their commercials, but you know the point I am making. The other thing is there an argument that Daniel Farke's football skews towards, and look, sounds a stupid argument, but him having 46 games and a squad and talent advantage where the process-driven football, rather than game by game, rather than chaos, works much better. And I think Daniel Farke's dream scenario is he literally never changes his team. He just goes on repetition, builds covalent bonds between players, builds pattern of play, and in the end, they out-football teams. And over long periods of time, they have success. You don't have that in the Premier League. You don't have superior players. You have 8 games fewer. And it feels like that playoff final, not only in terms of that meaning that Leeds lost ultimately Somerville and Ruter and, except Gray, etc., etc. Is that an example of Regis Lebris, who's doing a really good job at Sunderland, can apply a game-to-game view, cause chaos, set up to stop an opponent and eke out a clean sheet, eke out a draw, and when he's in a game, do something that makes you win the game. Look how he won the playoffs against Coventry in that semi and against Sheffield United in the final. It did feel like the manager got Sunderland over the line. Whereas Farke, I'm sure, turned up and the messaging was, you're the third best team in the league, do what you do and you'll win the game. And I just wonder whether that is his downfall at Premier League level, that yes, there are great process-driven managers. I mean, the greatest of them all you can probably argue Guardiola and Klopp are process-driven managers. Fine. But look at what they've got available to them to do that. Maybe that playoff final and the ability not to be able to win a one-off game, to adapt, to show versatility, is the canary in the coal mine that says this might not work long-term for Farke, who is hoping that the trust the process, keep doing what you're doing, will adapt slightly, is going to do the job when perhaps it might not. I do think the Leeds fans are between a rock and a hard place. The guy took you up. The guy is charismatic. The guy is likeable, isn't he? Scored 100 points. He's right to admit the Leeds fan base are emotional, but that does not mean that the Leeds fan base are wrong. They might be wrong 7 out of 10 times when they're being emotional, Leeds fan base, but they might not be wrong here. And that puts them between a rock and a hard place. And that puts the 49ers group between a rock and a hard place, because, it would have been so ruthless to score 100 points and take him out in the summer if you believe this. You believe everyone has the chance to prove themselves, especially when there were so many mitigating factors with his time at Norwich. Could you rely on that evidence? I don't think you could. But are we seeing similar things now? Perhaps we are. Do you make the change now? I don't think you do. And this, but then this feels even equally ruthless, because what you might be saying is that coming up, you've got Aston Villa, Man City, Chelsea, Liverpool, and then in December, before the transfer window opens, you go Brentford, Palace, Sunderland, and maybe that is the time you would make a change. And I'm sure Daniel Farke would argue, hang on a minute, why don't I get those games? Why don't you keep me? And there's just never a good time to make a change if it's not blindingly obvious right now that it's not working, but you're predicating that on, well, it's probably not going to work long term. Anyway, you can see I'm conflicted, but I did try and conclude this 5 minutes ago by saying I can see more than I have done before the merit in Leeds making a change. And look, for my YouTube channel, I will welcome Daniel Farke back to the Championship, where I'm sure owners will be falling over themselves to give him a job there. But does he need the 46 games, and does he need an advantage with playing squad to deliver success? Let me know what you think in the comments. Look, I've spoken for nearly 25 minutes on it. It is very, very nuanced, and we can't speak with any real strong determination about this. If you do, I think you're trying to fool yourself, because we don't know. It could work out with Farke. It could fail miserably with Farke. So let's try and respect the nuance and other people who are invariably going to have, dissenting views and different views, and present your argument to me in the comments. I respect everybody's right to an opinion, and you might be right. The best thing to do, chop Farke right now. You might be completely wrong. The best thing to do might be to keep him, and Leeds might still be in the Premier League and can build next season. None of us know. So, yeah, present your argument with humility and respect for those who may feel differently to you. And you can do that down there in the comments. And as I said, have a look up there. That is my chat I had with Matt SB and Conor McGilligan on this. It's going to rumble through the international break. But that was our thoughts on the Three at the Back podcast yesterday. Subscribe, thumbs up, get your views in. Farke dilemma, what to do.